This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You can sign up for free, and you can get yourself a free audiobook. And this is one of our special members section shows that we're able to do now. If you go to OppermanReport.com, you visit the members section. We have all kinds of new exclusive content on there. And then after a few weeks, it goes up into rotation on all the stations that carry our shows. So if this is a new station and you're hearing this show for the first time, check us out at OppermanReport.com and check out all the information we have in there on our members section. And if you have a show suggestion or a guest suggestion, you want to give me, send me a message at OppermanReport@gmail.com. Okay, today, a very fascinating story, and it's beyond description. Okay, honestly, our guest is Geoffrey Gilson. The name of the book is Maggie's Hammer, How Investigating the Mysterious Death of My Friend Uncovered a Netherworld of Illegal Arms Deals, Political Slush Funds, High-Level Corruption, and Britain's 30-year secret role as America's hired gun. Now, that has to be, it covers just about every topic that this audience loves. So we have with us today, our guest is Geoffrey Gilson. Jeff, are you there?
I am indeed. Thank you for having me on the show, Ed, and a special hello to all your members. I'm very excited you have this new membership service.
Oh, yeah, it's going great. Thank God for that, because it brings in a little money, and we have more time. We could do more shows during the week, and the show's just growing like crazy. Loyal listeners, man, I love them all.
That's great.
So Geoffrey, tell us first about yourself. Who is Geoffrey Gilson?
Well, Geoffrey Gilson is, as some reviewer very kindly described me the other day, somebody that nobody knows, but we welcome him to the fold of political intrigue. And I am precisely that. I am an ordinary person. I am probably like every single one of your listeners, an ordinary person who grew up in a small town of 11,000 people just outside of London. I trained as a lawyer. And indeed, at the time that these matters started, that's what I was doing. I was practicing law with my good friend Hugh Simmonds, who is the subject of my book. And we were both involved in politics, gently heading towards becoming members of parliament. And sleepy town, sleepy life, ordinary life, until the day he turned up dead in some local woods, and $7 million was missing from his law firm account. And my life got turned upside down because I was his senior employee. And the police thought I knew where the money was. And that's where the book starts.
Oh, my God. Because you started investigating his murder.
Well, basically what happened was, insofar as I say it's a murder, I am told it was a murder. At the time, remember, I'm his rather bemused senior employee. I had to go and identify the body. I could think of absolutely no reason why he was dead. Indeed, in the first draft of my book, I spent 3 chapters identifying all of the piecemeal evidence, which you as an investigator would probably find enthralling, Ed, but my publisher didn't find so enthralling, as to why there was something unusual about this death. What I thought was unusual was not enough evidence for a special autopsy, so it was ruled suicide. That actually becomes kind of irrelevant as the book continues. It was just an unusual circumstance. There was no reason for him to be dead. He was a successful businessman, a successful politician, and he was headed places, but he turns up dead. There, I would have left it because I assumed the police and the Law Society. Now, the Law Society is the equivalent of the National Bar Association in America. They investigated the death and the missing money. I thought they would find the missing money. There would be the reason for his death, and that would be that. But they stopped their investigations after about a year, even though there were still open leads. And I was still left without my name cleared, unable to know what had happened to my friend, who had a very young family. We were very close. I treated his daughters as nieces. And there it was left. And so I was in America at the time, and a gentleman with a fraud investigative firm called Carry2 International literally turned up on my doorstep to start asking me questions. And I was, why are you asking me questions? Well, he said, you know how we told you that you were free and clear? Yes, well, you're not. Because we can't find the money, and now we're looking for people, and you're top of the list. Then they stopped investigating, so at some expense to myself, I picked myself up, came back to England, and started asking questions.
Well, now, when you say the money went missing, there must have been some kind of record of how it left the account.
Well, it is very interesting. The curtain came down on his affairs almost the day after he died. Britain, for all the fact that it's become a little bit more open as a society, is still a very closed society. And I later discovered that the police and the Law Society both decided to investigate him on exactly the same day. And there is some indication that there was a higher authority, can name names, who started the investigation while he was alive into what was going on, the missing money, on the same day, which led to his death. But you're right. I thought the same thing. You find out where the money, you just follow the trail. How difficult can it be? But the people who were investigating his death were very close-lipped with me. They didn't really want to answer too many questions. But one of the things they did tell me was that all of the money had been taken out of the bank account with the bank manager's knowledge in cash.
Oh, boy.
And once it became cash. Now, the interesting thing is, and throughout this investigation, Hugh's father has been very supportive of me. He's now dead. And he made his own inquiries. And he was very clear in his own mind that if this matter had gone to court, if Hugh had been alive, the bank manager would have been in the dock alongside him. But no one investigated the bank manager. He was promoted and moved somewhere else.
Okay. So somehow the money, and now you were working for this guy, so you had signature authority on these accounts?
No, I didn't. Good question. I love this because I hear the investigator coming out in you. So I'm going to be very honest in my answer, which is, and I was very honest with the Law Society because all I can say is I don't know where the money is, because if I did, I'd probably be in the Bahamas sunning on a beach. $7 million is a lot of money. But even the police have said to me, we think you're conducting this whole investigation and you've written this book just to cover up the fact that you're actually the criminal. Which, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to plug the book's name again, Ed, Maggie's Hammer, actually should entice more people to want to buy the book. Because if you can prove that I'm the guy with the money, what a coup, you'll have your own book. But I'm not. But I worked for him as a senior employee. Of course, they would hold me in suspicion. So here's the true part. Did I think something strange was going on? Yes, I did, Ed. This is a lawyer. There were clients telephoning saying, where's our money? But he was my best friend. He was my boss. Put yourself in my position. How many times can you go in and speak to your boss? And I went in twice. I counted them and shut the door and said, Hugh, if there's something you need to tell me, you need to tell me. And he said, there is nothing going on that you need to know. At which point, what do? Do I call the police on my best friend? It's difficult. But I didn't have signature authority. I didn't have access to the bank accounts. I didn't have access to the bank statements. Otherwise, I'd have stopped him. But I was a senior employee, so I was implicated.
But there was a situation too where clients were calling up this lawyer demanding their money back, and he was like dodging them.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what was he up to then?
Well, I didn't know, and I mentioned the 3 chapters I spent trying to work out what it was before anything strange entered the picture. And I thought maybe he was trying to make money on the stock exchange quickly. Maybe he was depressed. I thought of all sorts of options. Maybe he'd contracted some nasty disease and had a short time to live. I didn't. I looked at all the possible options. I looked for possible strange business partners or whatever. But while he was alive, I didn't think anything more about it because he was a very exotic character. He had a very exotic sex life. He was involved in a lot of different things, business-wise and political-wise. None of them I thought were illegal until after he died. And there were a lot of strange things going around. And so for there to be strange things going on with his business, most of his business was conducted in his head. He was one of those sorts of people.
Right.
So he kept saying everything was okay. And at the point where I might have had the third conversation with him and said, Hugh, things really aren't okay, that would have been the day after he died.
Now, is this still an open police investigation?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. All right. So then you start looking into this. What did you find out?
Well, the first thing was that I found out very little. I thought my name was clear, and I was about to go off to America. And the day I was going to go to America, his father said that he had been told by somebody in authority, whom he could not mention, that Hugh had taken the money to get a foreign agent out of a foreign country, which blew my mind. The only reason it blew my mind was that Hugh had mentioned, amongst all the other exotic things, that he was involved in some way with British intelligence. And in a sense, this point is the same point about the money. I think there's a lot of your listeners who've sat in a bar with somebody who says, oh yeah, I used to be in the SEALs. You wouldn't know what I got up to. And generally we take those people with a pinch of salt. And if we like them, we listen to their stories. And it was kind of like that with Hugh. You know, I used to be in British intelligence. And one time I said to him, why do you keep telling me these things that you do? And he said to me, because one day you're going to be my insurance policy. So after that, I was in America. I came back to try and just clear my name. But in the middle of trying to clear my name, I remembered one name that Hugh had mentioned being his partner in intelligence. And I went to see this guy and I badgered him for 2 days. And he finally confirmed that Hugh had been in British intelligence and that what he'd been involved in just before his death was what led to his death. And this officer in British intelligence was convinced that he had been murdered.
Okay.
Do you want me to continue, or are you going to ask a question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, the general point is this. I then took up from that and started asking questions where I could. I know nothing about the clandestine world. I know even less about intelligence. I never read books on it. I didn't know anything. I would just hop from one name to the next with a story saying, is there something you can tell me? Do you know this guy? And that is precisely what I did. I also spent a lot of time reading books, trying to find some scenario that would fit the scenario that this British intelligence officer, he hadn't told me much, but he told me a little. And little by little, I pieced together a picture. And then simply by writing to people, by knocking on their doors, literally turning up on their doorstep, I managed to piece together a bigger piece of the puzzle. And what transpired was, on the basis of what I'm told, that Hugh was well known to Margaret Thatcher. That much I did know. He was her favorite speechwriter.
Okay.
That he was part of a group of people around Margaret Thatcher who were engaged in dirty operations to help further some of her foreign policy goals, including and primarily the massive sale of arms to then embargoed countries, Iraq and Iran. And his specific specialty, which it was as a lawyer, was to launder the money back from those arms deals to senior politicians in British Parliament.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
Okay.
Beyond that...
What year was all this happening?
Yes.
What year was this happening?
The arms sales?
Yeah.
Between 1984 and 1988.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So I then continued with my investigations, taking the story to further people, and that's when I got into talking to much higher authorities in Great Britain primarily, but also in America. I spoke with the manager of the bank which allegedly loaned some of the money to Hugh to set up the arms deals. And what became clear was this was part of a much bigger picture. It wasn't just arms deals. It wasn't just Margaret Thatcher's policy goals. It was plans that Great Britain and America had for the world. The bringing down of the Iron Curtain, the Cold War, relations with China, and so on. And this is when I began to stray into territory, which makes me feel uncomfortable, although it might, and I hope it will, entice your readers to want to buy my book. This is when I started entering the land of worldwide conspiracy, organizations like the Enterprise, and Octopus, and so on. And organizations I probably had laughed at in previous years, but when you actually meet people who say they're a part of this, you stop laughing.
What about Adnan Khashoggi? Did his name come up in all this?
I'm assuming you're asking that because you have your own interest. Yes, but only peripherally. The more important name that came up was Mohammed Al-Fayed.
Okay. And how did he fit into this? Because he's his brother-in-law.
Well, he fits into it in two ways. First of all, and again, this was just a question of following leads. I came across a lawyer who I've not been able to speak with in central London, who had as his clients many of the players in the big picture I was putting together. And his clients included Dodi Al-Fayed, Margaret Thatcher, Robert Maxwell, and a few other people, all of whom figure in the arms dealing that was going on in the 80s and in some of the incidents that have happened since then. And that is the first reason I came across Mohammed Al-Fayed. Mohammed Al-Fayed had a very interesting relationship with Margaret Thatcher.
Okay.
He was very unhappy with the British Conservative Party generally because they had denied him British citizenship. But he, along with Robert Maxwell, was engaged in some clandestine foreign policy with Margaret Thatcher. Mohammed Al-Fayed introduced her to the Sultan of Brunei, who provided Margaret Thatcher with very much needed funds to stave off a sterling crisis. And they also were involved in arms deals together. The other reason is, and this is something that I cover in this book, and indeed another author has covered in their book, because apparently I'm the only person suggesting it, which is that Princess Diana was not the target of that accident. Dodi was.
You think so, huh?
That is what my conclusions have led me to. Yes.
And what would be the motivation?
The motivation was, now I don't want to give too much away, Ed, because no one will ever buy the book. Shall I mention the name of the book again?
Yeah,
it's called Maggie's Hammer, people. And here's the deal. You just Google Maggie's Hammer. You will find your way to this book because there's no one else out there called Maggie's Hammer. Mind you, there's almost no one else out there saying the things that I'm saying, but then they haven't spoken to the people I've spoken to. Why do I say that Dodi was the target?
Yeah.
There's been a lot written about whether or not the accident, and I have no idea whether this was an accident or it was deliberate. I don't think anybody does because nobody was actually there watching it who's prepared to talk about it. But insofar as it might not have been an accident, a lot of the focus is on Henri Paul, the driver. Here's an interesting tidbit. I am a recovering alcoholic. If you take Prozac with alcohol, which is what it is suggested that Henri Paul did, you pass out within half an hour. He would not have got from his apartment to the hotel if he had Prozac and alcohol in his blood. So that's a tidbit. That's a side issue. But Mohammed Al-Fayed owned the Ritz Hotel, still owns, I believe, the Ritz Hotel.
Sure.
One of my intelligence sources, and you may probably know this already, Ed, and I'm sure your listeners do, that the Ritz Hotel in Paris is well known and has been well known since the Second World War as a safe house for people of nocturnal habits and clandestine activity to meet on safe ground. It's no man's territory. It is also the place where a lot of arms deals that aren't supposed to be happening are discussed. There was a very well-known court case in England when a British cabinet minister sought to bring a libel case against a newspaper for suggesting that he had been in that hotel conducting an arms deal, and he lost. And while everybody exploded about the fact that he lost the case, nobody said, well, okay, so he lost the libel trial, which means that he was there doing an arms deal. What arms deal would that have been? Nobody asked. Who knows why? But Mohammed Al-Fayed was therefore privy to a lot of secrets about the Ritz Hotel. And most of the arms deals that I'm talking about, particularly a big arms deal called Al-Yamama between Great Britain and Saudi Arabia, some aspect of those arms deals were discussed at the Ritz Hotel. After the general election in Great Britain in 1997, when the British Conservative Party finally was tossed out of power after 18 years, Mohammed Al-Fayed, who'd been running a bit of a campaign against the Conservative Party because they hadn't given him British citizenship, danced and cooed all over London in the press saying, good, and now I'm going to put the nail in the coffin because I'm going to reveal details about all the arms dealing, illegal arms dealing, that the British Conservative Party got up to, which I know about. And I actually wrote to him saying, do you know my friend Hugh Simmonds, as I did to hundreds of people, and at the same time, tongue-in-cheek. And this was at the beginning of August 1997. I said, I got to tell you, Mr. Fayed, you are pretty brave wandering around saying that you're going to expose these arms deals when there are probably people who do not want these arms deals exposed. And 2 weeks later, his son was dead.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And you think that was the motivation?
I think that was probably the motivation, if it was indeed not an accident.
I'm convinced it wasn't an accident. We did a really long show about that. And there's just so much went on. But then again, you're familiar with the stuff that happened when Princess Di was in the ambulance. They stopped the ambulance, and it seems like they finished the job in there. So it definitely...
Here's the interesting thing about the cause. I mean, I could be right, other people could be right. But what is fascinating is, and I have a friend who wrote a book about this, and he's included me in his book. The fascinating thing is he said, we've agreed that as more and more information becomes available, and not very much information is available, it seems to be more and more that people are talking about the people behind the death being arms dealers. And the more that comes out, the less flaky does my theory look like. But that's something I mentioned in the book. It's not the primary thrust of the book.
Gotcha.
The primary thrust of the book actually is just still to find out what happened to my mate. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, Ed, whether it's at a bar or somewhere else, you're trying to tell a joke and everybody keeps jumping in and laughing and saying, no, I'm still telling the joke. I haven't got to the punchline yet. I'm still trying to get to the punchline. I'm still trying to find out what happened to my friend. And as I go along, everyone keeps telling me that, yes, they know this guy, and he was up to this, and he was up to that, and this fits in here, and this fits in there. And I'm like, that's very interesting, but I still would like to know what precisely happened to my friend. But I tell you what, I said, I'll write the book so far, right, just in case people are interested.
I hate to be one of those guys at the bar.
Yeah. No, God, please, start laughing. Interrupt me.
Are you aware that about Ghislaine Maxwell, Robert Maxwell's daughter?
Well, Robert Maxwell figures very strongly in my book because one of my sources says that Hugh was very closely associated with Robert Maxwell. But when you say Ghislaine, I only know that she's his daughter.
Oh, my goodness. She was the girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, who was the billionaire pedophile who was convicted of, and she was actually in the allegations. She was the one who was procuring these young ladies for Jeffrey Epstein. And according to some of these victims, she has on her computer and her cell phone child pornography on her computer, on her cell phone. And even after Epstein was convicted and all this went to court, she was still invited to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton's wedding of their daughter, Chelsea Clinton. This
is the interesting thing, Ed. And I suspect it's probably why you're doing what I'm doing, what you're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing, and why your listeners are listening to your show. And it's what I touch on in Maggie's Hammer. People have asked me, said, okay, at the end of the day, in addition to finding out what happened to your friend, why did you write the book? And I think more and more people in America and Great Britain, certainly probably around the world, just feel like we're no longer in control of our own destiny. We're not in control of what's going on around us. There are hires up here, there, and everywhere who do things and they believe that they are completely untouchable. And if my book is anything, it is, yes, it's an adventure story. I got shot at and warned off by the CIA. And yes, it leads to some interesting places. And hopefully it will lead to the truth about my friend's death. But it's also a guide. My message to anybody listening to this show is, people, we don't have to accept that other people can do strange things and get away with it, that other people can do things and we don't have control over our destiny anymore. I am one ordinary person, and I started asking questions, and I may have turned some stuff up. And I know, because I am told, that there are one or two people in positions of authority in Great Britain who are a little nervous about me now. So if you want to know how to do it, buy the book. The book's a great guide.
Okay, very good. And I agree with you 100%. This is the goal. We're on the same mission here, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to expose these rascals, as you might say, and get them out in the open here. Now, okay, so now what happens next? Now, we got off on that tangent about Khashoggi and Dodi Fayed, which is a fascinating topic, those guys themselves. But back to your friend. And what are these warnings, these CIA warnings? How did you know it was CIA?
Well, you see, this is one of those interesting things. I'm not going to tell the whole story because otherwise there'd be no reason in buying the book. But when I was in London, after I started poking around, this gentleman turned up at the place I was working as a new employee, and he started mentioning at the bar afterwards, the guy in the bar again. Oh, I used to be in the SEALs. And I was like, yeah. He said, no, I didn't. He said, yeah, really. And I said, look, if you really used to be in the SEALs, I'd like to have a conversation with you. And he said, I used to be in the CIA and whatever. And I said, look, I did the friend routine. I've got a friend, and this friend knows some stuff, and he would really like to contact the CIA to have a conversation with them. But how do you do that? I know you. Maybe you can tell me. And at the end of this long conversation, which led nowhere, it was at his house in London. He led me to the door and shut the door and said, I told you I used to be with the CIA. That's not quite so true. Present tense, not past tense. And I have a message for you. The message is, stop doing what you're doing. And so I was kind of bemused, went home. He never turned up back at work again. And I went around to his house a week later, and it was empty.
Okay, that's a pretty good warning. Okay.
Well, it could have been coincidence, but there's a lot of coincidences in this book. Readers are going to have to make up their own mind.
Now, you said you were shot at, too.
Yes. Do you want to? I'm not going to give you all the details, but in an underground parking lot in Glasgow, Scotland, I was talking to a British intelligence contact who received a telephone call, which he later told me was a telephone call from his superiors to get rid of me. He said, end of interview, time to get in the car. I'm going to take you somewhere. We drove at high speeds through this underground parking lot. And he said, when I stop, you jump. He didn't stop, but he said, jump, opened the door and pushed me. And I didn't fall over. I managed to maintain my footholding. And I ran, because he told me to run, towards this door in the corner. And just as I got to the door, I looked around, and the car had stopped. He was leaning over the seat, and he was pointing his gun at me. I darted through the door, 2 explosions behind me.
So this is a guy you knew that was driving you in the car?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so now did you ever talk?
Yeah, here's the weird thing, Ed,
yeah.
That you and I are sitting here having this conversation. I had conversations with people like this the whole time. My contact in Israeli intelligence took me to dinner with his wife to give me information. It was surreal. The whole thing was surreal. And in a sense, that's another point about this book. We all think that conspiracies are undertaken by weird people in dark places that we don't know about. Folks, it's not true. Most of these people have houses and families, and they're ordinary people. And that's the point. My mate was an ordinary person until the day he wasn't. And he had a family, and he lived in a small, sleepy town. So this stuff could be happening down your street. So if something strange is going on around you, the chances are it's not strange because of you. It's strange because it's strange. Ask questions. You want to know how? Read the book.
And the book is Maggie's Hammer. You can get it at maggieshammer.com. Or, like you said, if you just want to Google Maggie's Hammer, it's the only thing that comes up. Our guest name is Geoffrey Gilson, and that's Geoffrey spelled the Geoffrey Gilson. And Geoffrey, don't worry, my audience buys books. Okay,
good.
This is a book buying bunch. Don't trust me on that. When we did our Marilyn Monroe show, just to give you an idea. Okay.
But when Marilyn Monroe does not feature in my story at all.
Okay, good. I was getting worried. But when we did our Marilyn Monroe show, there was 1,000 hits to the Amazon.com book page after the show.
Lovely.
Yeah. So I this does my books. But we won't see this right away because this is just for the members first. So, but this is going to roll out. It's going to roll out nice and slow by the time your book. When does your book go public again?
The book is going to be released at the end of this August, the end of this month.
Okay, yeah, it's like perfect timing, okay? And maybe we'll even have you back in a couple of months to tell us some more. Okay, so let's take a little commercial break here. We're with Geoffrey Gilson, Maggie's Hammer, how investigating the mysterious death of my friends uncovered a netherworld of illegal arms deals, political slush funds, high-level corruption, and Britain's 30-year secret role as America's hired gun. We'll be back after these messages.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. The show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audiobook. Tonight we have with us Geoffrey Gilson, the author of Maggie's Hammer. Not even an author, a regular guy. Just got caught in the middle of a bunch of craziness. Next thing you know, he got friends that is shooting at him. He's meeting with Israeli intelligence with his wife. And really went on a spectacular adventure. How long did this adventure last you?
Well, it's still going on.
Yeah.
It's still going on. I did most of my investigating in the first 10 years after he died, then the writing in the next 10 years. And as part of the writing, I then started telephoning and writing to people and asking for their comments and saying, your name has been mentioned. I did this all at the same time. Your name has been mentioned in this context. What do you have to say? Some of them didn't respond. Some of them did. And half of the book is basically in 3 sections. It's the adventure. It's the what I believe I've discovered in terms of the bigger picture, Britain acting as America's hitman, clandestine hitman for the last 30 years, and then the responses I got from people of authority to this, and some of them are hilarious, and some of them are very serious, and some of them are rather surprising. So it's still going on, and what I'm hoping with the publication of this book is that I can sell enough of them that I can get some money, because I work in a grocery co-op now. I'm a changed man, don't practice law anymore. I work in a grocery co-op. I advocate social justice issues. I write a bit. I write absolutely terrible pop songs, which one day may be very successful. But basically, I'm an ordinary guy. I don't have much money. So I'd like to sell enough books to get money so I can continue the investigation. It's not over. The book itself is a very big question mark. There are still leads that need pursuing. And it's my second hope with the book that there will be people out there who buy it, who may say, this guy you mentioned, this guy George, he lives down my road. I know George. This is fascinating. I'm going to take my copy of my book down the road and say, hey, George, let's have a beer. Tell me all about this. Because strange as it may sound, that's how I discovered as much as I did, just by turning up on people's doorsteps and saying, you mentioned, why?
Very interesting. Now, throughout all of this, now I can really relate. I've been involved in some really headache-type investigations involving serial payment and stuff, nightmare kind of stuff. My house is broken into. My office was broken into. Now, but going through this life, did you ever stop and say, that's it. I've had it. I'm going to move to a little farm out of the way. I'll burn all this stuff in public. They'll see I'm burning it, and they know I'm not going to be a threat.
Yeah, you know what, Ed? That's a great idea. I'm going to do that right now. It's nice talking to you. No, yes, and it's kind of a balance thing. People have said to me, "Okay, we get why you started this. He was your friend. Things didn't make any sense. You were held in some suspicion. You needed to clear your name. Then you discovered that no one was going to find the money, and you were completely held in suspicion. But you're 7,000 miles away, you're on the other side of the Atlantic. Why don't you just start a new life?" Well, because I wanted to find out for his family what had happened to him, and his father encouraged me in that. Then it got dangerous. And people were like, well, all right, the moment it got dangerous, why didn't you stop doing this? And, there's never an easy answer to that. Partly it's because I wanted to find out the answer. Partly, and I'd be dishonest if I didn't say this, Ed, I was kind of intrigued.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Most of us go about our lives and nothing very interesting happens. And I found myself in the middle of this adventure, in the middle of this intrigue. I actually kind of wanted to see where it would go. And I wanted to keep pushing just to see where it would go. But it's not yet over. There's a lot left. But did I ever think about stopping? Yes. And then something almost every time I thought about stopping, somebody would contact me out of the blue and say, I read an article, I read a copy, I read something that you said, I came across a website that you had, and I know something about this, would you like to know? And it's kind of like, Godfather 3, every time I wanted to get out, they pulled me back in.
I can so relate. I think certain people have a bit of bloodhound in their blood. And you get that scent, and you're pulling the leash, you're dragging the hunters, and you just can't let go. No matter, and you just got to keep pushing forward, no matter, even though all sense says not to.
And at the end of the day, also, Ed, the more I discovered about the bigger picture, the more I became kind of angry. Yeah. And as I said to you earlier, I think that anger is finding itself in some of the presidential candidates we're supporting in America at the moment, and we're seeing the same thing happen in Great Britain with the leadership election for the Labour Party, where this rank outsider is 20 points ahead in the poll. People are angry that this sort of stuff goes on, and we seem to get no say in it, even though it's supposed to be a democracy.
Now, how did you come to the conclusion that the UK is being used as America's hitman?
Well, this is interesting. I didn't go looking for any of this. It's not possible for me in 5 minutes to say how, it wasn't an overnight decision. It was a lot of very different things being told to me by a lot of very senior people. But there was one gentleman who was the chairman of what was Britain's third largest defense company. And he wrote a book and then spoke with me about this. And it was basically partly him, but partly also other people. The book, you've heard the book Charlie Wilson's War?
Yes, I have.
Okay. George Cryle, who I think is the author of that, writes about certain activities that the British Army were undertaking in Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, because the CIA were not allowed to go into Afghanistan. I had another journalist from a London national newspaper tell me about that sort of activity going on in the Lebanon. And putting all the little pieces together, because I was faced with this question when I got there. Why would somebody of Margaret Thatcher's stature, why would she be taking kickbacks from arms deals? Why would she be involved in these arms deals? Why would she allow her son and her husband to be involved in these arms deals? I mean, you say in pursuit of covert foreign policy. What covert foreign policy? And then I put all these pieces together, and the only conclusion I could draw, and I expand on it in some detail in the book, is that Great Britain was up to something much wider and much bigger than we knew about. What I did know, and we knew some of this at the time, was in the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher took over, Britain was bust. Everything was bust. Industry was bust. Government was bust. You see what's happening with Greece at the moment. At that time, we were the country going cap in hand to the IMF for funds. And the military and the intelligence services were also bust, as I discovered later. And she had to deal with them because they'd helped get her to power, which was in return for that help, she would let them off the leash and they could do what they like and they could raise money how they liked. And they raised money essentially by selling their services to the Americans.
But you're saying as hitman or as a just doing dirty work in foreign war?
They arranged assassination of certain figures in the Lebanon in the 80s, which, as you know, was a hotspot at that time, as indeed it has become again. And that's one of the interesting things about my book. People say, what on earth is there about the 80s that could possibly interest us 30 years later? Every single thing that's happening around the world at the moment was reflective of what was happening in the 80s. You had the Cold War between Russia and America, That's back. You had all sorts of strange stuff going on in and around Syria and the Lebanon. That's back. Iraq and Iran were headline news. That's back. Not in exactly the same way, but the same trouble spots were in the news then, and they were what caused the stuff that I describe in my book. And therefore, the stuff that I describe in my book is still happening. The networks are still there tenfold because of the size of the war on terror. But you specifically asked me a question I have now completely forgotten because I was talking so long.
No. The question was when you said that they were America's hitmen. Were they
yes, there is evidence that they were conducting assassinations in Lebanon. George Cryle writes in Afghanistan very specifically about the Brits, where the British special forces went into Afghanistan not only to continue the supply trail into Afghanistan, but also to undertake assassination of Soviet troops, which the CIA couldn't get involved with because of executive orders. There were arms deals that they arranged on behalf of America because America couldn't get involved with those arms deals. Some of them were known about, like the arms deal with Saudi Arabia in the 80s because Congress wouldn't allow the Americans to sell arms deals, and those that weren't. And so, yes, when I say hitman, I mean literally British special forces were used in American-sponsored assassinations. That's my understanding.
And it makes sense, too, because if you have, like you said, Khashoggi and Fayyad over there in the UK, that's where this stuff would be based out of.
It's very interesting that it's always been the case that Great Britain, and especially London, is a place where political refugees head because of our open society. But starting in the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher gave carte blanche to her military and the intelligence services, London particularly has become a centre for all sorts of clandestine activity. There's a book called Gomorrah, written by a gentleman whose name I can't immediately remember, which only a few weeks ago he wrote an article in one of the London newspapers saying, it's now known that London is the drug money laundering centre of the world. It's the money laundering centre for terrorist money. If you want a mercenary army, London is where you go. If you want to organise a drug deal, London is where you go. You want to organise a coup d'etat, London is where you go. And this started in the 80s under Margaret Thatcher.
Makes sense. Okay. Now you actually met with Margaret Thatcher. You had tea with Margaret Thatcher?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead. Let's hear this story.
Well, see, this was in the middle 80s. And at that time, I can tell you about this because it's not in the book.
Okay.
At that time, I was a vice chairman of a constituency association and had been for about 8 years. And this was after the second election that she won. And her advisor said, look, you spend a lot of time going to those parliamentary constituencies, which we need to win. But it's time to go to those parliamentary constituencies where we're safe, because they're the ones that raise the money. She said, okay. Arrange some whirlwind helicopter tours. So we were one of the targets. I live in a town called Beaconsfield, and we were one of the targets for a helicopter visit from Margaret Thatcher. And we were not supposed to know about this, but of course we did. We were invited to this country house out in the middle of nowhere, and we didn't know why we were going, hint. But of course we did, because we had very senior people say, you're about to meet Margaret Thatcher, and this is what you may do, and this is what you mayn't do. And I was standing there, I was thinking, I'm never going to meet a prime minister again in my life. I don't want to shake her hand and just go on. So I decided I would ask her a question. So she comes along, and the thing about Margaret Thatcher is she's dead now, is she's very small, very blonde, and even though she was in her 50s, and if I can say this on your radio station, I hope I can, very sexy. She exuded power. She was extraordinary. But anyway, so she comes along and she's taking everyone's help. How do you do, Mr. This? How do you do, Mrs. That? How do you do, Mr. The Other? And she shook my hand and I held on to it. And I said, Prime Minister, while you were here, I thought I'd ask you a question. Well, if the people around them could have lynched me, they would have done. And she said, yes, what? And I said, well, what do you think about your portrayal as a puppet on whatever? There was a program at the time that was very popular. And she looked at me with that glassy, glazy stare, and I thought I was dead. And then she burst out laughing, and we spoke. We spoke for 10 minutes. We sat down, had a cup of tea, while everyone else was just stood there gawping. We had a cup of tea, and we just discussed politics and television, and portrayal of political characters, and a very human moment.
You know what? I tell you, one thing we disagree about there, my friend, is I don't find her sexy at all.
You had to have been there, Ed.
Maybe.
And that's my point about my book. If you had to have been there, and if you can't be there, do the next best thing and buy the book.
Definitely buy the book. And as a matter of fact, I'm even going to be mentioning your book. I'm doing an interview this Saturday with the partner of Tom Secker.
Okay.
Yeah. You always playing with Tom Secker?
No.
Okay. Well, and since I'll be talking about Jeffrey Epstein, I'll bring up this whole connection with Robert Maxwell.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll mention your book for sure.
Thank you very much.
No sweat, my friend. I think we're on the same path here. Now,
well, except for not finding Margaret Thatcher sexy.
Well, but I think I'm right. Okay.
I want to meet the person who comes on your show and says that Marilyn Monroe was not sexy.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Yeah, she's such an icon, I tell you. And Princess Diana, too, the other one, too.
Princess Diana.
Same level as Marilyn Monroe, the two most popular shows. These iconic women. So now we covered a lot of stuff in the book, but what do you think we left out that you really want to get to in the last 10 minutes or so?
I don't know. I think you asked a question earlier, which was a good question. You sort of got digressed, which was what next? And there is a lot still to do. You might even wonder, and your listeners might wonder, why am I an obvious Brit on this show talking to American radio? And the answer is very simple. I've been told that Europe is not a very safe place for me to be. Certainly there are problems with publishing in Great Britain, because although I've been very careful about who I mention people, because there's no point in telling the story unless I mention the people it involves. And there are some very big names in there, including the last few prime ministers. And I've had correspondence with them, which was rather strange. And that's in the book. So I'm publishing it in America because America is a safe place to publish it. I'm looking for as much support as I can in America, as I say, so I can pursue the leads. But for this story actually to break, and this is the dichotomy, I have to pursue the story in Great Britain. So what I'm looking for is enough head of steam to build about this story for people in Great Britain to be interested enough and politicians to be interested enough, they start asking the questions which open the files. Because if my information is true, the British government has files. So that's basically what I'm trying to do. Other than that, buy the book.
And your publisher is Trine.
My publisher is Trine, and Chris Milligan, who is a wonderful man who I have yet to meet. He took my book on faith. He's published it on faith. He has spent a lot of his own money editing it, designing the cover, and I am truly grateful to Chris for having that amount of faith in me. A few people along the way have had a lot of faith in me. I've lost a few friends along the way, and Chris is someone who I owe a great deal of thanks.
Yeah, Chris Milligan is a very good man, a good friend of the show here. We've had pretty much all his authors we bring on the show here, and he has his own little CIA background too.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
It seems to be everywhere, isn't it? Okay. So, any appearances coming up? Any book signings? Where do you live in the States, first of all?
Well, I live in a little town called Carrboro, North Carolina, which is in fact very similar to the town I grew up in Great Britain, Beaconsfield. Right in the middle of North Carolina, and it's next door to Chapel Hill, which is the seat of the University of North Carolina. And I've got to say it, otherwise my friends will never forgive me. Go Heels. And that's where I live, and I work in a charming little grocery co-op, which is one of the largest grocery co-ops in the country, and I advocate for social justice issues, and I write pop songs. And
do you have any book signings or anything coming up?
No, I don't as yet. Yours is the very first interview I have given, arranged for me by Trine Day, and they are focusing on getting me radio interviews to begin with, and then after that we'll be doing some book signings.
Oh yeah, that's another thing you don't have to worry about, because everybody loves to steal my guests.
There you go. There you go. I am eminently stealable.
Let me tell you, my friend, if this was live, you'd be getting emails during the show.
Yes, good. And anybody can find my email because I put it everywhere. People say, isn't that a little risky? And I'm like, if I want people to write to me and say, I knew something about this and I can tell you, then I've got to be open.
Well, not only that, too, but, listen, you've already made your bed. You know what I mean? You're out there. There's no sense in trying to hide now. You're probably better off in the public.
I have been told that I am better off being as public as I can, because although I'm on your show and I'm very, very thankful for that, not a lot of people out there know about me yet. And as one British intelligence officer said to me, the safest place you can be is unknown, because if we make you known by killing you, then we're in all sorts of trouble. So somebody said to me rather cleverly, so what you're saying is, if we make you famous, you're dead? And I was like, why does everybody have to be so miserable? Maybe they'll just buy the book and be happy.
That is an option,
Yes.
But again, it's a tough road.
Yes,
it's a tough road putting yourself public. But also, too, you should be getting a lot more new tips now from people that have inside information about this. So that's another. So you're still working on this investigation. It's an open case. The money's still gone, right?
Yep.
Do you have any idea who took the money?
That's the interesting thing. The money is still gone. The one thing they did find out that they did tell me was that as they were looking for this money, they came across all sorts of other money, which is one of the reasons the investigation was stopped. And that the amount of money that they found may have been anywhere between $30 million and $150 million.
And do you have any idea where the money went?
Ed, I have no idea, because frankly, my friend, if I knew where that money was, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be out there cashing it.
But even suspicions, even of who you think that...
No, I honestly don't know. What seems to be the case, and I've had information to this effect, is that he may have taken the money out of his law account to do a run-up to be safe, because things got too hot. And if that's the case, he piggybacked the money on money he was already laundering for other people. And when the plug was pulled, everything stayed where it was. So there are people who are looking for that other money, and I've been followed by them over the years. But his money, in terms of the total, is insignificant compared to this other money.
And his actual death, and you said it was ruled a suicide, but now, did you ever come up with any conclusion on that?
No, it would have required the sort of resources I didn't have at the time. And at the time, I didn't know anything. It's only later on I discovered stuff when it was too late to raise questions about the autopsy. But I know, I've discovered, and you know this better than I do, Ed, that there are all sorts of ways that one can inflict death upon someone without it being detectable during an ordinary autopsy. You have to be looking for something. So there's nothing there. But I am told by two intelligence officers who knew of him and knew of his activity that although they weren't prepared to make any admissions, indeed, one of them might have been the person that was involved, they strongly believe that he was murdered.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, we're here with Geoffrey Gilson, the author of Maggie's Hammer. Where is this here? How investigating the mysterious death of my friend uncovered a netherworld of illegal arms deals, political slush funds, high-level corruption, and Britain's 30-year secret role as America's hired gun. You can find a link to that book on the Opperman Report blog. You go right there and you click on it and you get right to his book. They're fascinating information. This is all the kind of stuff we cover all the time. Great guest. You're a natural.
Thank you.
Geoffrey, people are going to love you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're a natural, man. And,
well, thank you for having me on the show.
Well, what I'd like to do, though, is as soon as you make your rounds there, come on back.
I will do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you.
We'll be back after these messages.